He's mentally unstable. My daughter's voice echoed through the courtroom, sharp enough to make complete strangers flinch. She stood confidently at the plaintiff's table, perfectly dressed, while I sat alone and silent, the defendant already judged before the trial even started. The judge didn't interrupt her. He studied me closely, then glanced down at a sealed federal file sitting on his desk. He leaned forward, his voice remarkably calm. "Miss Sullivan," he said, "do you actually have any idea who your father really is?" Her lawyer instantly froze. The color drained from my daughter's face, and right then and there, the case she had so carefully built started to completely fall apart. "I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. Before we keep going, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And when the video ends, please rate it on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments section. Your feedback helps me grow and tell these stories even better. One last quick note before we dive back in. This story includes fictional elements for storytelling and educational purposes. While some details have been adapted, the core message is meant to be meaningful and practical. The room smelled like old oak and stale coffee. Courtroom 506 in the Cook County Courthouse. High ceilings, wood-paneled walls, the kind of place that's supposed to represent blind justice. I sat at the defense table, wearing the gray suit Elizabeth bought me 10 years ago. Navy blue tie, polished leather shoes. I looked like a man who had his entire life together. But according to my daughter, I was losing my mind. Natalie sat across the aisle at the plaintiff's table, 36 years old, wearing a sharp black blazer with her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She looked flawless, her makeup perfectly natural, not a single hair out of place. She was the kind of daughter any father would be proud of, except today. She was here to ruin me. Sitting next to her was Charles Mitchell, her lawyer, 54, silver hair with a deep baritone voice, the kind of attorney who could make a blatant lie sound like absolute gospel. He had been droning on for 20 minutes, rattling off his case like a grocery list. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, pointing a finger at me, "Mr. Sullivan has shown a severe cognitive decline over the past 3 months. Memory loss, disorientation, and hallucinations. His own primary care physician has already diagnosed him with early-stage dementia." I didn't move or say a word. I just sat there with my hands folded on the table, watching quietly. Mitchell kept going. He forgets where he lives and talks to people who aren't there. Just last week, a neighbor found him wandering down State Street at 2 in the morning in his pajamas, Your Honor. He couldn't even remember his own home address. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a few reporters in the back row scribbling furiously. It was a great headline. Retired tax consultant loses his mind. Daughter forced to step in. If only they knew the truth. Mitchell turned to Natalie. "Miss Sullivan, could you describe your father's behavior for the court?" Natalie stood up slowly, making it look like the hardest thing she had ever had to do. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "Your Honor, I didn't want to do this, but I don't have a choice." She looked over at me, tears welling up in her eyes. For a split second, she was so convincing, I almost believed her myself. "He is completely unstable," she said, her voice cracking. "He talks to my mother even though she passed away 3 years ago. He constantly forgets where he is. Last week, I found him in the kitchen at 4 in the morning, cooking breakfast for someone who wasn't there. He genuinely believes Mom is still alive." The courtroom went dead silent. Even the court stenographer stopped typing. Natalie wiped away a tear. "I love my father, but he's just not safe on his own anymore. He needs professional help. I can't just stand by and watch him put his own safety at risk." I wanted to stand up. I wanted to yell that every single word out of her mouth was a blatant lie. But I stayed put because I had a plan. And this plan required absolute patience. I looked up at the bench. Judge Samuel Pierce was presiding over this circus. 58 years old, silver hair, and a stern expression. He had been buried in his paperwork since I walked in, never once looking directly at me. But now he lifted his head. Our eyes met. And in that single second, maybe even less, his expression shifted completely. Total shock. recognition. He remembered. I had seen that exact look before. 24 years ago, July 1998, Lakeshore Drive. A terrible car crash. Flames. An 8-year-old girl trapped in the back seat. Her father was unconscious at the wheel. I was the one who pulled her out of that wreckage just moments before the car was completely engulfed. That little girl was Melissa Pierce, and the man sitting up there on the bench in the black robe, holding the gavel, was her father. Judge Pierce blinked and looked back down at his files. But I knew he recognized me, and he chose to keep quiet. Smart man. Mitchell wrapped up his argument. Your Honor, we are asking for an emergency conservatorship and guardianship. Mr. Sullivan is no longer capable of managing his own affairs. His daughter is ready to step up, take responsibility for his care, and ensure his well-being. Judge Pierce set his papers down and looked at me. Mr. Sullivan, do you understand the allegations being made against you? I stood up. My voice was steady and calm. Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely. Judge Pierce studied me intently for a long moment. Then he nodded. This court will recess and reconvene in 1 week. I need time to review the evidence. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and the courtroom instantly erupted into chatter. Reporters were talking, people were standing up, and the sound of footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Natalie sat frozen at her table, staring straight ahead. She didn't look at me once. I packed up my things, slid the manila folders into my briefcase, and buttoned my suit jacket. As I walked past Natalie's table, I caught a glimpse of her face. She looked exhausted and anxious, but there wasn't a hint of guilt. Good, I thought. She has absolutely no idea what's coming next. I walked out of the courtroom, feeling the heavy weight of the world on my shoulders. Natalie hadn't looked at me. Judge Pierce recognized me, I was sure of it, but he had kept his mouth shut. Outside, the May wind cut right through my suit. Chicago felt a lot colder than usual for this time of year. I pulled my coat tight around myself and headed down the courthouse steps. Somewhere behind me, my daughter was plotting my downfall. But somewhere ahead, a plan was taking shape. I just needed to stay strong enough to see it through to the very end. But first, I needed to look back at exactly how this nightmare started. 3 months ago, I had no clue my daughter was mixed up with criminals. It was a Monday morning back in February, cold, gray, and completely ordinary. The kind of morning that makes Chicago look more like a black and white photograph than a real city. I was sitting in my office on West Adams Street, reviewing tax returns, when I saw the name that changed everything. I should have seen it coming. 26 years as an FBI agent taught me to spot patterns, anomalies, and red flags. But somehow I missed the biggest one of all. My daughter's company was buried right there in a stack of client files on my desk. Morrison Development Group, LLC. Chief Executive Officer, Natalie Sullivan. My office was small, located on the 3rd floor of a rundown building in the Loop. The sign outside read, Sullivan Tax Consulting. Established 2020. I opened it after retiring from the bureau. For 35 years, I had spent my life tracking down money launderers, corrupt bankers, and white-collar criminals. Then one day I turned 62. They handed me a gold watch and a pension and told me it was time to take a break. But I was never the type to just sit around and do nothing. So I kept working in the shadows. This office was a perfect front. It allowed me to stay in the loop, monitor financial crimes, and feed intelligence back to the Bureau whenever a major case crossed my desk. My contact was Special Agent in Charge Diane Foster at the FBI's Chicago field office. Diane was 52, sharp as a razor, and one of the best financial crimes investigators I had ever worked with. We had been partners for 15 years before my official retirement. She knew I couldn't just walk away from the job entirely, so she kept me on as a consultant, unofficial, unpaid, and completely off the books. Most days I would wake up at 5:30, brew some coffee, read the Chicago Tribune, and drive downtown. I'd spend 8 hours reviewing spreadsheets and tax forms for clients who thought I was just an ordinary accountant. They had no idea I was actually looking for patterns, anomalies, and those tiny discrepancies that separate a legitimate business from a criminal enterprise. The apartment in Lincoln Park was far too quiet now. Elizabeth had been gone for 3 years. passing away in March of 2019. We rarely talked about the illness that took her. She just slipped away one afternoon, as if she had been holding on for as long as she possibly could, until she couldn't anymore. In the mornings, the house still seemed to carry the faint memory of her brewing coffee. Sometimes, without even thinking, I'd find myself setting out 2 mugs instead of 1. The work helped. It gave me something to focus on other than staring at an empty chair across the breakfast table. Natalie didn't call all that much, maybe once a month, twice if I was lucky. 6 months ago, we had met up for coffee at a little place over in the River North neighborhood. She looked exhausted, totally checked out, and mentioned being overwhelmed with her real estate firm, though she didn't offer many details. I didn't push. After Elizabeth passed away, we drifted apart. Maybe that was on me. Maybe I spent way too much time hunting down bad guys and not nearly enough time just being a dad. She had gotten divorced 2 years back, no kids. She never talked about it, and I never pried. That was just how the Sullivans handled things. Keep the pain to yourself. That Monday morning, I was going through a file for a potential new client. Morrison Development Group, LLC. Registered address, 150 North Riverside Plaza. I came incredibly close to passing right over it. If the CEO's name hadn't practically jumped off the page at me, I definitely would have skipped it. Natalie Sullivan. I sat there completely frozen, staring at the screen. My daughter had never once mentioned owning a development company, let alone the name Morrison. I pulled up their website, and it was stunningly professional and sleek, showcasing a portfolio of high-end luxury condos and prime commercial real estate that should have taken years to build up. Then I dug into the financials. There was $500,000 moving through their accounts every single month. Wire transfers from entities I had never heard of. Apex Capital LLC, Riverfront Holdings, Blue Water Investments. I cross-referenced the addresses. Delaware, the Cayman Islands, Panama. My chest tightened. Shell companies, offshore accounts, massive, high-frequency wire transfers with absolutely no clear business purpose. I had seen this exact pattern 1,000 times before. It was textbook money laundering, except this was my daughter. I leaned back in my chair, staring blankly at the screen. I tried to come up with a legitimate explanation. Maybe real estate deals or international investors. Maybe she was just scaling up her operations and I was being overly paranoid. But numbers don't lie, and neither do patterns. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a burner phone I kept for emergencies. Only one number was saved in it, a direct line to Diane. I hadn't dialed it in 2 years. I picked it up and made the call. It rang twice before she answered. Foster, her voice came through, crisp, professional, and entirely business. It was the exact same tone I'd heard on countless surveillance operations and early morning briefings. Diane, I said quietly, it's Vernon. I need your help. A brief silence followed. Then what's going on? I looked back down at the screen. Morrison Development Group, 500 grand. The Cayman Islands. I think my daughter is laundering money, I said. The line went completely dead. When Diane finally spoke again, her entire tone had changed, turning incredibly guarded. It was the voice she only used when a case became personal. Vernon, where are you right now? 2 days later, I met up with Diane at a coffee shop back in River North. She chose the spot. A public, crowded, completely anonymous place where nobody would ever think twice about who was sitting next to them. Intelligentsia Coffee on West Jackson Street was absolutely packed at 3 in the afternoon. The espresso machines hissed and whined behind the counter, and laptop screens glowed at every single table. Young professionals were sipping lattes and cold brews, chatting loudly about deals and deadlines. It was the perfect cover. Just 2 regular people having a standard business meeting. Diane Foster hadn't changed a bit in the 2 years since I'd officially retired. She still had those piercing gray eyes that never missed a detail. The same sharp blazer, charcoal gray today, and that strictly professional upright posture. She slid into the booth across from me and set down a plain manila folder. No FBI logos, no official markings, just handwritten notes. Vernon, she said, getting straight to the point, you are playing with fire here. I ordered an espresso and she got a black tea, but neither of us touched our cups. She opened the folder and slid a few sheets of paper forward. Just handwritten notes, no photographs, nothing that could link back to the bureau. "We can't be seen together too often," she murmured. "This is completely off the books." I nodded. I expected as much. Diane leaned forward, dropping her voice below the loud hum of the coffee shop. "Morrison Development Group is actually one of 15 shell companies we've been tracking. They're all tied into a massive network that's laundering $50 to $60 million a year through Chicago real estate. 50 million. I knew the numbers were large, but hearing it out loud still made my chest tighten. "The mastermind behind this entire network," Diane continued, "is Apex Capital LLC. It's run by a man named Luca Moretti." She slid another piece of paper across the table. A single name, an address, a date of birth. Luca Moretti, 45, CEO of Apex Capital, born and raised in Chicago. According to Diane's notes, he was laundering money for the exact same criminal enterprise I had spent half my career trying to take down. "Does that name ring a bell?" Diane asked. I stared down at the name. Moretti. Tony Moretti. The memories hit me like a splash of ice water. "Tony Moretti," I said slowly. "November 1999. Racketeering and wire fraud. We locked him away after an intense 18-month investigation. He got 25 years. Diane nodded. "Luca is his son. He was only 22 when you arrested his father. He watched federal agents put his dad in handcuffs and lead him away from their home, and he blamed you for everything." I laid the paper down. "Where has Luca been since then?" "Prison. He was brought in back in 2005 for assault and conspiracy, serving 15 years. He got out in 2020. Since then, he's been rebuilding his father's old network, only he's doing it smarter, quieter, and he's far more dangerous." She paused, locking eyes with me. "Luca knows exactly who you are, Vernon. He's been looking for you." A cold chill ran straight down my spine, and now he had found me through Natalie. Diane didn't answer right away. She glanced around the coffee shop, making absolutely sure no one was listening in. Then she leaned closer. "Your daughter's company has been laundering money for Moretti for at least 2 years now. $6 million a year moving through fake condo developments. We've been tracking the wires from the Caymans, Panama, and Delaware LLCs. It's textbook work." "Is she an active partner, or is she being forced into this?" I asked. "We don't know," Diane said. "That's exactly what we're trying to figure out. If she's doing this willingly, she's going to prison. If she's being blackmailed or threatened—" Her voice trailed off. "We need more solid evidence, communications, and testimony. If we make a move right now, Luca will vanish into thin air, and your daughter will take the fall all by herself." I leaned back, thinking about Natalie. I remembered the last time I saw her at the coffee shop 6 months ago. She looked incredibly exhausted, maybe even frightened. At the time, I assumed it was just from the divorce, but maybe it was something else entirely. "Let me go undercover," I said. Diane's eyes narrowed. "Vernon!" "I'll get close to Natalie. Figure out if she's being forced into this and gather evidence from the inside." "You're retired, Vernon," Diane said coldly. "And she's your daughter. There's no way you can stay objective." "That's exactly why I have to be the one to do it," I replied. "If she's innocent, I'll prove it. If she's guilty—" I stopped, swallowing hard. "If she's guilty, I'll do what's right." Diane studied me for a long, quiet moment. Then she closed the folder and stood up. "Luca Moretti is incredibly dangerous," she said. "He's not like his father. Tony was a businessman, cold and calculating. Luca is different. He's volatile, emotional, and reactive. If he realizes you're digging into his business, he will come after you, and he won't hesitate for a second." I nodded. "I understand." Diane placed a hand on my shoulder. "Do you really? Because from where I'm standing, you're 64 years old, and you've been away from field operations for 2 years." She slid a business card across the table. It had a single phone number written on it, nothing else. Handwritten and completely untraceable. "Call me if you need anything at all," she said. "And Vernon—" She paused near the door, looking back. "Be careful. Luca has eyes everywhere." I watched her walk out, took the card and tucked it safely into my wallet, then finished my espresso. Outside, the freezing February wind rattled the windows. Somewhere out there in the city, Luca Moretti was waiting. And much closer to home, my daughter was hiding secrets I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to uncover. 3 weeks went by. I kept a close eye on Natalie from a distance, looking over surveillance photos, bank records from Diane, and phone logs. There wasn't any definitive proof yet, just the usual patterns: weekly wire transfers and meetings with men in expensive suits. Then on a Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Natalie. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. I hadn't heard her call me like that in months. I was wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner this Saturday. I've really missed you. I should have said no. Every single instinct I had was screaming that this was a trap, but she was my daughter. And a part of me, the foolish, hopeful part, wanted so desperately to believe she was innocent. I let Diane know about the invitation. We met up briefly in a dark parking garage near Roosevelt Road, and she wasn't happy about it. I should wire you up, she said. Not yet. I need to see if she's being genuine first. Diane pulled a small antidote pill from her jacket pocket. Take this with you, just in case. If you start feeling dizzy or disoriented, take it immediately. I looked down at the pill. You think she's going to drug me? I think Luca might, and your daughter might not have a choice in the matter. I slid the pill into my shirt pocket. Saturday night, I drove out to Lincoln Park. The building Natalie lived in was a massive structure of glass and steel, towering 15 stories high with a perfect view of Lake Michigan. It was the kind of place where a single month's rent was more than most people made in a year. I had never asked how she could afford it. Maybe I should have. She opened the door wearing a simple black sweater dress, her hair falling around her shoulders. She smiled, the exact same smile I had seen 1,000 times while she was growing up. Birthdays, graduation, her wedding day. Dad, I'm so glad you could make it. I gave her a hug and felt her body stiffen up just for a split second before she relaxed and hugged me back. The apartment was incredibly modern, filled with white leather sofas, a glass coffee table, and abstract art hanging on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights stretching out into the darkening sky, the sunset painting everything in deep shades of orange and gold. The scent of creamy butternut squash soup drifted out from the kitchen. Elizabeth's recipe. I recognized it instantly. I made it using Mom's old cookbook, Natalie said, leading me over to the dining table. Do you like it? It's perfect, I said, but my mind was already filing away every single detail. The expensive furniture, the view, the way she moved around the kitchen like she owned the world, or like she was trying incredibly hard to pretend she did. She served dinner, the butternut squash soup, some toasted bread, and a bottle of Merlot. I ate the soup. It was sweet, velvety, and tasted exactly like the way Elizabeth used to make it. For a fleeting second, it felt like I was 20 years younger, sitting at our old kitchen table, watching my wife laugh at some joke Natalie had made. Then I tasted the wine. It left a subtle, slightly bitter aftertaste in the back of my throat. How's work going, Dad? Natalie asked. Are you still doing the tax consulting? Yeah, it's peak season right now, with the April tax deadline coming up. Are you working every day? Most of the time? Why do you ask? I'm just worried about you. You're 64 now. You should be taking things easier. I noticed the careful way she phrased her questions. It wasn't casual. It felt rehearsed. What time do you wrap up? Do you drive or take the train? She was mapping out my entire daily routine. She poured me some more wine. Dad, you've barely touched your glass. I took a small sip, trying to look completely relaxed, though my pulse was starting to race. Dad, she said, setting her fork down, have you been feeling all right lately? I'm fine. Why? Mrs. Harris called me last week. She mentioned you looked really exhausted. I froze. You spoke to Evelyn? She's worried about you, Dad, and so am I. Evelyn Harris, my neighbor back in Lincoln Park, was 72 years old, a kind woman who was always asking if I needed anything. I had no idea she was even in contact with Natalie. I'm completely fine, Natalie. Just busy. Natalie looked at me, her expression incredibly hard to read. Was it genuine concern, or was she calculating something? Just promise me that if anything feels off, you'll go see a doctor, she said. Any dizziness, confusion, or memory issues. Why would she say that unless she knew something? I stayed until 9 that evening, thanking her for the dinner. She gave me another hug at the door, holding on tighter this time, almost out of desperation. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too," I said, my voice catching slightly. I drove home as the city lights blurred past my windshield. My head felt incredibly heavy, and my hands were trembling slightly on the steering wheel. I pulled over on Halsted Street and sat in the dark for a few minutes. Was it just stress, or was it the wine? I finally made it back home just before 10. The apartment was dark and cold, and I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I sat down on the sofa with my coat still on, staring blankly into space. My head felt like it was filled with cotton. When I reached for my phone to text Diane, my hand was shaking badly. Home safe, nothing unusual to report. But right before hitting send, I noticed something. My wallet was sitting right there on the coffee table. I always kept it in my pocket. Always. I was incredibly strict about it. 35 years as an agent had trained me to never let my identification out of my sight. I had absolutely no memory of taking it out. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't even remember where I had parked my car. 5 days after that dinner, I started forgetting things. It began with tiny details, where I put my keys, the name of a client I had worked with for months, the exact way home from the grocery store. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just exhaustion catching up with me. But on Thursday morning, I woke up and couldn't remember what day of the week it was. I stared at the calendar on the kitchen wall, March 10th, 2022, but the numbers felt completely foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. I went through my usual routine, up at 5:30, brew the coffee, read the Tribune. But as I reached for the coffee grounds, I couldn't remember how many scoops I had already put in. 2? 3? I stared down at the filter, trying desperately to remember, but my mind was a total blank. I sat at the table and opened the paper, reading the exact same paragraph 3 times over. I still couldn't tell you what it said. I needed to get to the office. I had a meeting with a client at 10 o'clock. I grabbed my coat and reached for my car keys, but they weren't on the hook by the door. I searched the kitchen counters, the dining table, and the nightstand. Nothing. My heart began to thud against my ribs. I had used that same set of keys for 12 years. The exact same keychain, a tiny FBI badge that Elizabeth had given me as a retirement gift. I never misplaced them. 20 minutes later, I found them in the refrigerator, sitting right next to the milk. I stood there holding the cold metal, trying to comprehend how I could have put my car keys in the fridge. Was I distracted? Did I do it without thinking? I had absolutely no memory of it. The moment simply didn't exist in my head. I made it to the office at 10:15, running late. I was never late. My client was already waiting for me. Ronald Carter, 51, a branch manager at First National Bank. We had been working together on his corporate taxes for 6 months. A good, reliable man. "Good morning, Agent Sullivan," he said before pausing with an awkward smile. "Sorry, I mean Mr. Sullivan." I froze. Agent Sullivan? Why did he call me that? Did I ever tell him I used to be with the FBI? I couldn't recall. 35 years of training had made me incredibly guarded about my past. But maybe I had let it slip. Maybe my cover was cracking. "Good morning, Ron," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. We sat down, and he started talking about quarterly projections, tax write-offs, and depreciation schedules. I nodded along and took notes, but halfway through I had to ask him to repeat something we had already covered the previous week. He looked across at me, a flash of concern crossing his face. "Mr. Sullivan, are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," I said, "just a bit tired." He didn't look convinced. By 5:30 I called it a day, turned off the office lights, and drove home. The route back was pure muscle memory. West Adams Street to Roosevelt Road, Roosevelt to Halsted, and then right into Lincoln Park. I had driven this path 1,000 times, but when I reached the intersection of Roosevelt and Halsted, I stopped. I couldn't remember which way to turn. Left? Right? I sat at the red light while the cars behind me started honking. I pulled out my phone and opened Google Maps. The blue dot showed I was only 2 miles from home. 2 miles. I had lived in Lincoln Park for 15 years. I should have known the way. I eventually made it back, parked by the curb, and sat in the dark car for a long time. my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. My mother had suffered from dementia, but it didn't start until she was 85. I was only 64. Too young, too early. What on earth was happening to me? I got out and walked toward my apartment building when I spotted her. Mrs. Evelyn Harris was standing on the front steps of the brownstone next door, watering her plants. 72, silver hair tied back in a bun, wearing a cardigan despite the chill. She had been my neighbor for 10 years, always kind, always checking in. The kind of woman who would bring you soup when you were sick and never expect anything in return. "Vernon," she called out, "I've been meaning to give you a call." "Oh, sorry, Evelyn. I've just been incredibly busy." She set down her watering can and walked over, her face lined with worry. "Are you doing all right, dear? You look incredibly pale. And yesterday I saw you standing in the hallway for 10 minutes, just staring blankly at your door." I had absolutely no memory of that. None at all. Her expression softened into a mix of pity and fear. "Vernon, maybe you should go see a doctor. My husband started showing symptoms just like this." She trailed off, but I knew exactly what she meant. Her husband, Frank, had passed away 5 years ago from Alzheimer's. "I'm fine, Evelyn," I said gently. "Really, just exhausted from work." She nodded, but she clearly didn't believe me. "If you need anything at all, just give me a call." "I will. Thanks, Evelyn." I went inside, shut the door, and leaned back against it, my hands shaking. I took off my coat and reached into the pocket for my phone, but my fingers brushed against something else, something small and hard. I pulled it out. A pill bottle, orange plastic, completely unlabeled. Inside were 5 or 6 small white pills. I stared at it. I had no memory of putting this in my pocket, no recognition of the pills, and no clue where they came from. Did Natalie give this to me? I thought back to Saturday night, the dinner, the wine, the conversation. But everything after that was entirely fragmented. The drive home, the couch, the wallet left on the table. Had she slipped this into my coat, or had I picked it up somewhere and completely forgotten? I set the bottle down on the kitchen counter, walked into the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back looked old, exhausted, and deeply confused. For the first time in 64 years, I didn't recognize myself, and the terror that brought me was far worse than any criminal I had ever hunted down. 8 days went by, and the confusion didn't fade. It settled in quietly and permanently, like something that had finally found its home. Friday morning, I sat at my desk, staring at a tax return on the computer screen, the numbers blurring into a giant mess. They smeared together like watercolors in the rain. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, pressed my palms against my face, and when I looked up, I froze completely. Elizabeth was standing right there in the doorway. She was wearing that navy blue cardigan I bought her for our 30th anniversary, the one with her favorite pearl buttons. Her hair was dark again, without any of the gray that had started showing before she got sick. She smiled at me, that gentle, knowing smile I knew so well, the one that used to make everything completely manageable. "Vernon," she said softly, "you're working way too hard again." I bolted upright, my chair screeching loudly against the floor. I reached out for her, my chest tightening and a lump forming in my throat, but she vanished into thin air. The doorway was completely empty, and the hallway outside was dead silent. I sat back down, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the desk, forcing myself to breathe. It wasn't real. She wasn't real. Elizabeth had been gone for 3 years. I knew that. But the fact that my mind could lose its grip on reality like that terrified me far more than anything Luca Moretti could ever do. By noon, I realized I had missed a client meeting with someone I had been working with for 6 months. He had called twice, leaving a voicemail asking if I was all right. I had absolutely no memory of the appointment, but when I checked my calendar, it was written right there in my own handwriting. Noon, James Rivera, Q1 review. I called him back, apologized, rescheduled for Monday, and blamed it on a bad case of the flu. He was understanding, but his concern was obvious. "Are you sure you're doing all right, Mr. Sullivan?" I lied and told him I was fine. I wasn't. I was losing time, losing pieces of myself, and I had no idea how to stop it. That night, I went home early, skipped dinner, and sat in the dark living room with a glass of water I never drank. The apartment was entirely too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I replayed the hallucination over and over in my head. Elizabeth's face, her voice, the exact way she said my name. I wanted to call Diane and tell her everything, but if I admitted I was hallucinating, she would pull me off the case immediately. She'd have to, and I couldn't let that happen, especially not with Natalie buried so deep in Moretti's network. So I sat there in the dark, convincing myself I was fine, until the phone rang. It was Mrs. Harris. "Vernon, dear, I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said gently. "I saw you come home quite early today, and you didn't look well at all. Are you feeling okay?" I told her I was just exhausted, but she didn't buy it. "I know you, Vernon," she said. "You never slow down unless something is wrong. Have you been to see a doctor?" I brushed it off, thanked her, and promised to take care of myself. After hanging up, I stared at the phone, wondering just how much she had noticed, how much everyone was noticing. 2 hours later, the phone rang again. This time it was Natalie. "Dad," her voice was incredibly tight. "Mrs. Harris called me. She's really worried about you. She said you've been forgetting things and getting lost." My chest tightened. I had no idea she even had Natalie's number. "I'm completely fine," I said. "It's just been an incredibly busy week." "Stop it, Dad," Natalie said, her voice cracking slightly. "I've seen it too. You forgot where your car was parked, and you left your wallet at my place. That's just not like you." She was entirely right, and I had no defense. "I really think you need to see a doctor," she said. "Just for a quick checkup. Can you please do that for me?" I closed my eyes and nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I promise." A wave of pure relief washed over her voice. "I'll call tomorrow to check in. I love you, Dad." "I love you too." After hanging up, I sat in the dark for a long time, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The next morning, I called a clinic over in the Gold Coast area and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. I told the receptionist I had been dealing with some memory issues. Nothing severe, just something I wanted to look into. She set me up with Dr. Alan Prescott, a neurologist with over 20 years of experience. At 2 o'clock, I sat in a pale blue waiting room, watching the clock tick entirely too loudly. When the nurse finally called my name, I followed her into an examination room that smelled heavily of rubbing alcohol and anxiety. Dr. Prescott arrived a few minutes later, a silver-haired man with gold-rimmed glasses and a very calm demeanor. He listened quietly as I described the forgetfulness and confusion, though I left out any mention of Elizabeth, the mysterious pills, or Moretti. He ran me through a series of cognitive tests, and I struggled through them. He definitely noticed. When he finished, he folded his hands and looked me straight in the eye. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, choosing his words very carefully, "the symptoms you're describing point toward early-stage dementia." The word hit me like a freight train. "How soon can we know for sure?" I asked. "We'll need an MRI and some blood work," he replied. "It should take about a week." I agreed to all the testing and walked out of the clinic, feeling like the very ground beneath my feet was completely vanishing. On Monday afternoon, Natalie drove me over to Dr. Prescott's office, a building that looked like it belonged in a luxury magazine, all glass and steel, exuding an air of quiet, effortless wealth. She waited down in the lobby with her phone and a coffee while I took the elevator up to the 8th floor alone. The receptionist gave me a perfectly practiced smile as she checked me in and guided me down a hallway that carried a faint scent of lavender and leather. Dr. Alan Prescott was younger than I had pictured. In his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and thin metal-rimmed glasses, he possessed a voice so calm it could talk someone down from a ledge. He motioned for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, and I sat down. "Mr. Sullivan," he began, resting his folded hands on a yellow legal pad, "your daughter mentioned you've been having a difficult time lately. Memory lapses, confusion, and disorientation. Why don't you walk me through exactly what's been happening?" So I did. I told him about finding my keys in the refrigerator, missing client appointments, and completely forgetting the way home or even what street I lived on. And then, because he asked, and I didn't know what else to do, I told him about Elizabeth. I described seeing her stand right in my office doorway, hearing her voice, and how she vanished like smoke the moment I reached out to touch her. "Did you believe she was real at the time?" he asked, his pen pausing over the pad. I swallowed hard. No, I knew she wasn't. But in that exact moment, it felt completely real. More real than anything else. He jotted something down and nodded slowly. Is there any history of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, or dementia in your family? My mother, I murmured. She had Alzheimer's, diagnosed at 85 and passed away 2 years later. He made another note, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite pin down. Maybe it was sympathy, maybe pity. I wasn't sure which one was worse. I'd like to run a few cognitive exercises, he said, setting the pad aside. Nothing invasive, just some tasks to establish a baseline. I nodded, and he began guiding me through the assessment. First, he gave me 3 words to remember: apple, table, and penny, telling me he'd ask for them again later. Then he handed me a blank sheet of paper and asked me to draw a clock, showing the time at 10:15. I drew the circle, filled in the numbers, and placed the hands where I thought they belonged. When I handed it back, he studied it for a moment before placing it face down on his desk. Now, he said, I want you to start at 100 and count backward by sevens. I started. 193, 86, 79, 72. My brain felt incredibly sluggish, like I was trudging through thick mud. 65, 58. I paused, hesitating. He waited quietly. 51. I finished, but I could tell from his expression that it had taken me far too long. Good, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Now, can you repeat those 3 words I gave you earlier? I closed my eyes, searching my mind. Apple. That one was easy. Table. Got that one too. But the 3rd word was completely gone. I sat there in silence, my jaw clenched and hands balled into fists on my lap, before finally shaking my head. I can only remember 2, I admitted. He jotted that down. The word was penny, he said softly. I felt something shatter inside me. Dr. Prescott set his pen down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me with that guarded, measured expression doctors always use when delivering bad news. Mr. Sullivan, he said slowly, based on your symptoms and the results of these exercises, I believe you are experiencing early-stage dementia, likely accompanied by paranoid hallucinations. The words felt like a physical blow to the stomach. I stared at him, my mind racing and my heart pounding wildly against my ribs. Dementia, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. I'm only 64. Early-onset dementia can manifest in patients in their 50s, he explained in a calm, clinical tone. It's uncommon, but certainly not unheard of, especially with your family history. He pulled out a prescription pad, scribbled something I couldn't read from across the desk, tore the page off, and handed it to me. I'm prescribing a mild sedative to help manage the hallucinations. It will also help with the anxiety and confusion. Take 1 tablet every night with dinner. We'll schedule a follow-up in 2 weeks to see how you're responding. I looked down at the script. The handwriting was nearly illegible, but I could make out part of the drug name, something ending in done. I folded the prescription, slid it into my pocket, and stood up. Thank you, doctor, I said, my voice entirely flat. He stood as well, shook my hand, and walked me to the door. But as I stepped out into the hallway, I caught the sound of his voice again, low and muffled, speaking to someone on the phone. I stopped dead in my tracks. The door behind me hadn't closed all the way. Yes, I just finished examining him, Prescott said, his voice dropped to a quiet murmur. The diagnosis is confirmed. He's showing every single symptom you described. A brief pause followed. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. I'll send over the report tonight. I felt the blood completely freeze in my veins. He wasn't evaluating a patient who walked in off the street. Dr. Prescott had been given a script. Someone told him exactly what to look for, what to find, and what diagnosis to hand down. I didn't stay to hear another word. I walked back to the elevators, pressed the button, and rode down to the lobby in total, deafening silence, my mind spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. The moment I got back to the apartment, I went straight to the kitchen. I pulled the leftover container of Natalie's butternut squash soup from the fridge and carefully transferred a sample of the orange liquid into a plastic Ziploc bag. Then I picked up my burner phone and dialed Diane Foster's direct line. I need your lab to run a toxicology screening on a food sample, I said the second she picked up. Test it for risperidone, benzodiazepines, or anything else capable of inducing acute memory loss and severe hallucinations. Vernon, she said, her voice dropping instantly into a cautious murmur, what exactly is going on? I'll explain everything when I see you. Can you meet me tonight at 9? The lower level of the field office parking garage. I'll be there at 9 sharp. At 9, I pulled into the dim, concrete depths of the FBI's Chicago field office on West Roosevelt Road. Diane was already waiting by the elevator bank, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of deep concern and professional skepticism. I handed her the plastic bag. She held it up to the harsh fluorescent light, studying the pale orange liquid, then looked back at me. This will take 3 days, she said. Maybe 4. I can wait. She slid the bag into her jacket pocket. Vernon, if someone is actively drugging a former federal agent, this is no longer just a money laundering investigation. You understand the implications, right? I understand perfectly. She searched my face for a long moment, then let out a heavy sigh. Just stay alert. If Moretti is behind this, he isn't going to stop at messing with your food. I know. I turned to walk away, but she called after me. Vernon, for what it's worth, I don't think you're losing your mind. I looked back over my shoulder and managed a weak smile. Thanks, Diane. That means a lot. I drove back through the dark, empty streets of Chicago, the city lights stretching out like blurry lines in my rearview mirror. Dr. Prescott's voice kept echoing in my head. He's showing every single symptom you described. They had set me up. Someone had carefully orchestrated the entire diagnosis. When I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine, a cold, absolute certainty settled over me. I knew exactly who was pulling the strings. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. But 3 days later, when Diane called with the lab results, I wouldn't have a choice anymore. Those 3 days felt like 3 agonizing years. I barely slept a wink. Every meal felt like a risk. Every phone call from Natalie felt like a trap closing in on me. I stopped replying to her text messages, and I let her calls go straight to voicemail. When she showed up at my front door on Wednesday afternoon, holding a bag of groceries, looking at me with frantic worry, I didn't let her pass the threshold. I told her I was just tired, that I was completely fine, and that I just needed some space. She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way she looked at me, like I was a fragile piece of glass that had already shattered. Maybe I was broken, but certainly not in the way she thought. Then on Thursday morning at exactly 1:47, the burner phone on my nightstand buzzed. Diane's voice was low and urgent. Meet me right now, the usual spot. I didn't ask questions. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my keys, and drove across the desolate city to the parking garage on North Des Plaines Street. It was the same concrete bunker where we had met hundreds of times during my active days, back when our cases didn't involve my own flesh and blood. At 2 in the morning, the garage was a ghost town. Just me, a few concrete pillars, and the echo of my own footsteps bouncing off the walls. A minute later, Diane's black SUV pulled in, headlights cut, engine idling silently. She stepped out holding a plain manila folder, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. Vernon, she said, walking up to me, we need to talk. I nodded, swallowing hard, and waited. She handed me the file. Under the dim overhead light, I opened it. FBI Laboratory Analysis Report. Case number VS-032122. Substance detected, risperidone. Concentration 10 milligrams. Adverse effects: confusion, memory impairment, hallucinations, tremors, and severe disorientation. I stared at the black ink until the words blurred together. My hands were shaking. She's drugging me? I whispered, my voice barely holding together. Someone is, Diane corrected gently. We don't know for certain if it's Natalie or Luca doing the physical tampering, but it is completely deliberate, Vernon. Someone is trying to have you legally declared mentally incapacitated. Why? I looked up at her. For the first time in 35 years of law enforcement, I felt like a victim instead of an investigator. So Natalie can claim full conservatorship over you, Diane said. It gives them total control over your assets, your freedom, and your credibility. But more importantly, it completely neutralizes you as a threat. A threat to Moretti. Exactly. Diane pulled out a second, much thicker folder and handed it over. We've had surveillance on Natalie for the past 6 months, she explained. Every Tuesday she meets with Luca Moretti at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse in River North. Same table, same time. We've got the photos right here. I flipped through the pages. There was Natalie sitting across from Luca, her face completely pale, her hands tightly clenched in her lap. Luca was leaning forward, whispering something right into her ear, his expression cold and entirely dominant. In one photo, Natalie's eyes were red and swollen, as if she had just been crying. In another, Luca's hand was clamped firmly around her wrist. She looks terrified, I said. Because she is, Diane replied. We intercepted a call last week. Luca is blackmailing her, Vernon. He has some kind of leverage over her, some video footage, and he's using it to force her into handling the laundering operation. She isn't a criminal mastermind. She's a hostage. I felt something break deep inside my chest. My daughter, my Natalie. I had spent the last 3 weeks treating her like the enemy, thinking she had turned into a monster, but she was just terrified. She was trapped in a nightmare, and I hadn't been there to protect her. What kind of video? I asked, my voice hoarse. We don't know yet, Diane said. But whatever it is, it's severe enough that she's willing to risk everything to keep it hidden. I closed the file, handed it back, and leaned heavily against the concrete pillar. My head was spinning, my heart racing so fast I couldn't even think straight. Luca knows exactly who I am, I finally said. He knows your ex-bureau, Diane confirmed. He's been watching you for years, Vernon, ever since his father went away. This isn't just about the money laundering for him anymore. This is personal revenge. And Natalie is the weapon. Yes. I looked at Diane, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I knew exactly what I had to do. Let her take me to court, I said. Diane's eyes went wide. Vernon, let her file for the conservatorship. Let Dr. Prescott take the stand. Let Luca believe he's won. I clenched my jaw, making sure my voice carried absolute certainty. When the time is right, I will expose everything on the record in open court. It's the one place Luca can't touch me, and the one place Natalie can't be forced into silence anymore. Diane studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're going to need evidence. Hard, undeniable proof that goes way beyond a lab report. I know. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, black USB drive. 6 months of surveillance logs, she said, placing it firmly in my hand. Bank statements, photographs, wiretap audio, and exact timestamps. Everything we have on Moretti's operation and Natalie's forced involvement. If you're going through with this, you're going to need it all. I took the drive, clamping my fingers tightly around it, feeling the immense weight of what I was about to do. Thank you, Diane. Don't thank me yet, she said softly. If Moretti catches wind of what you're doing, he won't stop at messing with your food. He'll come after you, and he'll come after Natalie. I know. And you're still going to do it? She's my daughter. Diane looked at me for a beat, then gave a firm nod. Then be smart about it. Stay alert. And whatever you do, do not let Prescott know that you are onto him. I won't. Diane's SUV pulled away, its taillights vanishing into the dark, leaving me completely alone in the freezing, empty garage. All I had was that USB drive and a plan that felt like walking a tightrope over a raging fire. Somewhere out there in the city, my daughter was being blackmailed by a man who wanted to destroy me. Somewhere, a corrupt doctor was writing a fraudulent diagnosis to make it all look completely legal. And somewhere, a trap was tightening. A trap that would either save Natalie or bury both of us for good. I walked back to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat in the silence for a long time, staring down at the USB drive in my hand. The game was already in motion, and I was 3 steps behind. But I had been underestimated before. I had survived far worse odds. I just had to make sure I stayed vertical long enough to finish this. Because if I failed, Natalie was going down with me. 4 days later, the trap snapped shut. A process server showed up at my front door at 10 in the morning, holding a thick manila envelope stamped with bold black letters. Circuit Court of Cook County. I signed for it, closed the door, and sat down at the kitchen table. My hands were shaking as I tore the seal open. The first page was written in that cold, sterile legal language, designed to strip away your humanity and reduce your entire life to a single case number. Emergency petition for guardianship and conservatorship. Petitioner, Natalie Sullivan. Respondent, Vernon Sullivan. Grounds, severe cognitive decline, paranoid hallucinations, and an inability to care for himself or manage his own financial affairs. Hearing. Date, Monday, May 2nd, 2022 at 9 a.m. Courtroom 506. Presiding, Judge Samuel Pierce. 5 weeks. I had exactly 5 weeks to prepare for the biggest fight of my life. I flipped through the rest of the paperwork, my chest tightening with every page. There was a sworn affidavit from Dr. Alan Prescott, detailing my diagnosis of early-stage dementia with paranoid features, complete with fake test results and clinical observations. There was a signed statement from my neighbor, Evelyn Harris, describing how she had found me confused and disoriented on multiple occasions, unable to remember where I lived. There was a statement from Ronald Carter, the bank manager, detailing the meetings I had missed and the phone call where I sounded distant and entirely lost. And then clipped to the very back was a grainy black and white surveillance photo with a timestamp, 2:37 a.m. It showed me standing entirely alone in the middle of a sidewalk, staring blankly into nothingness. I had no memory of that night. I had no idea where the footage had even come from. But it didn't matter. To anyone reading this file, the case against me was absolutely rock solid. I looked exactly like a man who had completely lost his mind. The final page was a cover letter from Charles Mitchell of Mitchell and Associates, a high-end firm specializing in elder law and contested guardianships. I had heard of him during my time in the Loop, sharp, completely ruthless, and possessing an 87% success rate in contested hearings. He was incredibly expensive, elite at what he did, and a total professional. And he was representing my daughter. I set the papers down and leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. I could hire an attorney. I had connections, former colleagues, and defense lawyers who owed me favors. But if I retained counsel, if I started fighting back openly, Luca would know instantly. And if Luca knew I was pushing back, he would assume Natalie had slipped me information. He would tighten his grip on her, or worse. No, I had to do this completely alone. I had to play the part of the confused, fragile father, right up until the exact second I pulled the rug out from under them. And then I would burn their whole setup to the ground. I picked up my burner phone and called Diane. She answered on the second ring. "Diane, they're moving incredibly fast," I said, keeping my voice low. "I just got served. The emergency hearing is set for May 2nd. That leaves me with only 5 weeks." "I know." There was a brief silence on the line. "Have you retained a lawyer?" "No, I can't do that, Diane. If I hire someone and start building a formal defense team, Moretti is going to realize something is off. I have to let this play out exactly the way they expect." "You're going to represent yourself?" "It's the only option I have." "That is a terrible idea, Vernon." "It's the only idea I've got." She let out a heavy sigh, and I could picture her rubbing her temples, the way she always did when a case got messy. "What do you need from me?" "Time," I said. "An absolute silence. Do not move against Moretti until this hearing is over. Let him think he's won. If the judge rules against me and Natalie gets the conservatorship, I'll file an appeal, or I'll expose everything from whatever facility they try to put me in. But it won't get that far. You sound awfully confident for a man who just got served with a mental competency petition. I've been underestimated before." She was quiet for another moment, then said, "Just be careful, Vernon. You are playing an incredibly dangerous game." "I know." I hung up, set the phone down, and stared at the pile of legal documents in front of me. Later that evening, I made a call to Natalie. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice soft and trembling, sounding as if she had just been crying. "Dad, I received the paperwork," I said calmly. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want it to come to this. But I didn't know what else to do." "You're sick, Dad. You're forgetting things, you're seeing things, and I'm terrified you're going to seriously hurt yourself." Her voice broke completely. "I can't lose you the way we lost Mom." I closed my eyes, feeling the sheer weight of her words wash over me. She actually believed it. She truly believed that I was losing my mind. Maybe that was the most heartbreaking part of this entire situation. She wasn't malicious. She didn't even realize she was being used as a weapon against her own father. Nat, I said, picking my words with absolute care, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but this isn't the way to solve it. Then what is? She cried out, her voice rising. Because I've tried everything. I've called you. I've come over to check on you. I begged you to see a doctor, and you just keep pushing me away. What else am I supposed to do? I wanted so badly to tell her the truth. I wanted to tell her about the risperidone, about Luca Moretti, and about the USB drive sitting safely in my desk drawer, with enough evidence to completely dismantle Moretti's entire network. But I couldn't, not yet. I'll see you in court, I said softly. Dad, I love you. Natalie, no matter what happens, I need you to know that. And before she could say another word, I hung up the phone. That night, I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter. It wasn't a formal will, I already had one of those, and it wasn't a confession. It was an insurance policy, to whom it may concern. If you are reading this letter, it means I am either deceased, missing, or otherwise unable to speak for myself. My name is Vernon Sullivan. I am a retired FBI special agent, and I am of completely sound mind. I have not lost my memory, nor do I suffer from dementia. I have been deliberately and systematically drugged with risperidone by unknown individuals, attempting to discredit me and seize control of my assets and my freedom. The attached USB drive contains definitive evidence of a massive money laundering operation run by Luca Moretti, into which my daughter, Natalie Sullivan, was blackmailed and coerced. Dr. Alan Prescott, who diagnosed me with dementia, is a corrupt participant in this conspiracy, and his medical findings are entirely fraudulent. I possess FBI laboratory results confirming the presence of the drug in my system. If I do not survive this, ensure this information is delivered directly to the Cook County State's Attorney and the FBI's Chicago Field Office. Attention Special Agent in Charge, Diane Foster. Sincerely, Vernon Sullivan. I sealed the envelope, addressed it directly to Judge Samuel Pierce, and left it sitting right there on my desk. If anything went sideways, if Luca moved faster than I anticipated, or if I didn't make it to that hearing alive, someone would find it. Someone would know the truth. Outside, the March wind rattled the glass panes. Somewhere out there in the city, my daughter was preparing to stand against me in a courtroom. Somewhere, Luca Moretti was watching. Somewhere, the trap was tightening. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the skyline. The massive high-rises of Chicago loomed against the gray sky, cold and entirely indifferent. I had spent 26 years putting criminals behind bars. Now I had to prove I didn't belong in one myself. 5 weeks. That was all the time I had left. 5 weeks to stay sharp, stay sane, and stay alive long enough to finish what I started. And if I couldn't, at least I was leaving a trail for someone else to follow. I just hoped it would be enough. The night before the hearing, sleep was completely out of the question. I lay flat on my back, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the clock on my nightstand tick away the hours. 11 o'clock turned into midnight. Midnight became 1 in the morning. By 2, I gave up entirely, got out of bed, and went to brew a pot of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, holding a photograph I had pulled from an old drawer. It was Natalie at 5 years old, wearing a bright pink dress, laughing so hard her eyes were practically squeezed shut. It was her birthday party. Elizabeth had baked a chocolate cake from scratch, decorating it with little frosting flowers, and let Natalie lick the spoon. I remember that day with absolute clarity, how I had gotten down on my hands and knees on the living room floor of our cramped apartment, pretending to be a horse while she rode on my back, squealing with pure delight. "Faster, Daddy, faster!" she had yelled, her tiny hands gripping my shoulders tightly. And I had run faster, despite my knees aching and my back sore, because making her laugh like that was the only thing in the world that mattered. Where did that little girl go? Where exactly did I go wrong? I set that photo down and picked up another one. Natalie at 18, June 2004, her graduation from Lincoln Park High School. She was standing right between Elizabeth and me, wearing her cap and gown, proudly holding her honors diploma. Her smile was confident, proud, and just a little bit nervous. I I got into Northwestern, Dad. She had told me that afternoon, her voice trembling with excitement. A full academic scholarship. I had hugged her so tightly I thought she might break. I'm so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart, I had whispered into her hair. And I was proud, deeply and truly proud, but I was also entirely distracted. At the time, I was deep into an investigation targeting a massive fraud ring operating out of Cicero. I had missed half of her senior year, missed the choir concerts, the college visits, and those late-night talks with her mother because I was always somewhere else, chasing down someone else's wreckage. I told myself I was doing it for her, for our family, to keep her safe and secure. But the truth was much simpler and far uglier. I was elite at being a federal agent, but I wasn't entirely sure how to be a father. I picked up the third photograph, Natalie's wedding, May 2018. She looked absolutely stunning in a white gown Elizabeth had helped her pick out, even though the cancer had already spread to Elizabeth's lungs by then, leaving her struggling for breath after walking just a few steps. But Elizabeth had insisted on being there. I'm absolutely not missing this, she had told me, clinging tightly to my arm as we walked down the aisle. Natalie had smiled the moment she saw us, tears welling up in her eyes, tears I assumed were born of pure happiness. But looking back at it now, I had to wonder. Her marriage lasted exactly 2 years. The divorce was finalized in 2020, just 3 months after I officially retired from the Bureau. She had called to break the news to me, her voice completely flat and distant. It just didn't work out, Dad, she had said, and I hadn't pushed for details. I should have. Because somewhere in those 2 years, when she was at her most vulnerable and completely alone, Luca Moretti had found her, and I hadn't been there to stop it. I laid the photographs down, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. I had spent 35 years putting bad guys away, convincing myself I was making the world a safer place for people like Natalie. But I had been so focused on the world that I forgot to protect the one person who mattered most. I couldn't save her by sacrificing justice. I had to use justice to save her. It was the only way this worked, and it was the only way either of us was making it out of this alive. At 5 a.m, I stood up, walked into the bathroom, and turned on the shower. I shaved meticulously, combed my hair back, and spent a long moment staring at my reflection in the mirror. 64 years old. The deep lines around my eyes, the silver hair at my temples. I looked incredibly tired, but I didn't look like a madman. I looked like a man who had been through the ringer and wasn't about to throw in the towel just yet. I went to my closet and pulled out the sharp navy suit I had worn to Elizabeth's funeral, the only suit I owned that still fit me perfectly. I threw on a crisp white shirt, tied a red silk tie, and slipped into my polished black leather shoes. Then I opened my desk drawer and pulled out 2 items, the black USB drive Diane had given me, and my old FBI badge. The leather case was worn, the gold shield scratched around the edges, and the photograph inside slightly faded, but it was still mine. I tucked both items deep into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and took one last look in the mirror. "You are not crazy," I said out loud, my voice firm and unwavering. "You are a federal agent. Start acting like one." At 6:30, I grabbed my keys and walked to the front door, my hand pausing on the brass knob for a single beat. This was it, the moment I had been actively preparing for. If I won, I would save Natalie and bring Luca Moretti's operation down for good. If I lost, I would spend the rest of my days confined to a medical facility, heavily drugged and completely forgotten, while Natalie remained under Moretti's control, never knowing the true story. I opened the door and stepped out into the crisp May morning air. The city was just starting to wake up. Joggers on the sidewalks, the sound of engines starting, and the faint, distant rumble of the L train over on the tracks. Chicago looked exactly the same as it always did, cold, indifferent, and beautifully harsh. I got into my car, started the engine, and sat there staring at the steering wheel for a moment. In 3 hours, I would walk into courtroom 506 and face my daughter, her elite attorney, a corrupt doctor, and a judge I hadn't seen in 24 years. I would be doing it entirely alone. No backup, no lawyer, and no safety net. Just me. The absolute truth. And a USB drive full of evidence that would either secure my freedom or end my life. I shifted into drive and pulled out onto Halsted Street, heading north toward the courthouse. The sun was just starting to peek over the lake, painting the sky in a pale, washed-out shade of gold. It was going to be an incredibly long day, but I had survived long days before and I was still standing. I arrived at the Cook County Courthouse at 8:15, parked in a public lot across the street, and walked through the morning crowd toward the massive structure of glass and concrete that had served as the heart of Chicago's legal system for as long as I could remember. I went through the security checkpoint, emptying my pockets, keys, wallet, phone, before stepping through the metal detector. My FBI badge and the USB drive remained hidden away in the inside pocket of my jacket. No one asked about them, and no one conducted a physical search. I took the elevator up to the 5th floor, located courtroom 506, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The courtroom was already starting to fill up. Natalie was sitting over at the plaintiff's table on the left, wearing a charcoal gray blazer and a white shirt, her hands tightly clenched in her lap. She didn't look up when I walked in. Charles Mitchell sat right next to her, organizing a stack of files with calm, effortless confidence. Over on the right side of the room at the defense table, my station was completely empty. I walked over, set my briefcase down, and took a seat all by myself. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff stood up. All rise. The Honorable Judge Samuel Pierce presiding. The entire room stood up. I remained standing, my hands resting flat on the table, watching the judge enter from the side door and take his seat on the high bench. He looked older than I remembered, silver hair, deep lines around his eyes, but his posture was still perfectly straight, his expression entirely calm and measured. He didn't look at me, at least not yet. "Be seated," he said, and the room sat down in unison. Judge Pierce opened the thick file in front of him, scanned the first page, and looked up. "This is the matter of Sullivan versus Sullivan. Case number 2-02-2-CH-4471, regarding a petition for emergency guardianship. Mr. Mitchell, you may proceed." Charles Mitchell stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and stepped into the center of the room. "Thank you, Your Honor," Mitchell began, his voice completely smooth and practiced. "This is a tragic case involving a father and a daughter, both of whom want what's best for each other, but disagree on what that actually means. My client, Natalie Sullivan, has watched her beloved father deteriorate severely over the past several months. Memory loss, acute confusion, and vivid hallucinations. He has missed critical appointments, misplaced his keys in bizarre locations, and been found wandering the city streets in the dead of night." He gestured toward the stack of documents on his table. "We have provided the court with a sworn medical affidavit from Dr. Alan Prescott, a board-certified neurologist who has diagnosed Mr. Vernon Sullivan with early-stage dementia accompanied by paranoid hallucinations. We have supporting witness statements from neighbors and professionals who have observed this decline firsthand. We also have surveillance footage showing Mr. Sullivan entirely alone at 2:30 in the morning, disoriented and unable to find his way back home." Mitchell paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the courtroom. "Your Honor, this isn't about punishment. This is entirely about protection. Miss Sullivan is asking this court for the legal authority to ensure her father receives the necessary medical care and supervision before he causes harm to himself or anyone else." He took his seat, and Judge Pierce gave a slow nod. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Dr. Prescott, please take the witness stand." Dr. Alan Prescott stood up, walked over to the box, and was sworn in under oath. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and folded his hands neatly in his lap. Mitchell walked toward him holding a folder. "Dr. Prescott, could you please state your professional qualifications for the record?" "I am a board-certified neurologist with over 20 years of experience, specializing in cognitive disorders, including Alzheimer's and dementia." "And have you personally examined the respondent, Vernon Sullivan?" "Yes, I conducted a comprehensive evaluation of Mr. Sullivan on March 21st of this year." "What were your findings?" Prescott opened his file, glanced down at his notes, and spoke with clinical precision. Mr. Sullivan demonstrated significant impairment in short-term memory recall. He was entirely unable to remember a simple list of words, and his clock-drawing assessment showed clear spatial disorientation. He also reported experiencing vivid hallucinations of his deceased wife. It is my professional opinion that Mr. Sullivan is suffering from early-stage dementia with paranoid features. In your expert opinion, is he currently capable of managing his own affairs? No, Prescott said firmly. He is not. Mitchell nodded. Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions. He walked back to his table, and Judge Pierce looked across the room toward my side. Mr. Sullivan, you may cross-examine the witness. I stood up slowly, feeling the intense weight of every single eye in the room shifting toward me. I walked over to the witness stand, stopping just a few feet away, and looked directly at Dr. Prescott. He met my gaze, looking entirely calm and confident. Dr. Prescott, I said, my voice completely steady, during your examination, did you conduct a toxicology screening? He blinked. I'm sorry, a toxicology screening? A test to determine if there were any foreign substances present in my system. Drugs, medication, or anything that could potentially induce memory loss or acute hallucinations. Prescott shifted slightly in his chair. That is not standard procedure for a routine cognitive assessment, but is it possible for an individual experiencing sudden confusion and hallucinations to actually be suffering from drug-induced symptoms rather than dementia? It's possible, he admitted slowly, but highly improbable. Highly improbable, I repeated. Did you test my system for risperidone? The color drained from his face instantly. No, I did not. Risperidone is an antipsychotic medication, correct? Yes. And its known side effects include confusion, memory impairment, and severe hallucinations. Yes, however, so if someone were being dosed with risperidone without their knowledge, their symptoms would look exactly like early-stage dementia, wouldn't they? Mitchell bolted upright from his chair. Objection, Your Honor, pure speculation. Judge Pierce looked at me for a long, quiet moment, then said, Objection sustained. Mr. Sullivan, do you have any evidence to support this line of questioning? I paused for a beat. Not at this exact moment, Your Honor. I am currently working to secure it. Then move on to your next question. I nodded, took a step back, and walked back to my table. Prescott looked noticeably rattled. Mitchell looked thoroughly annoyed, and Natalie looked completely bewildered. Then Judge Pierce leaned forward. For the first time since the hearing started, he looked straight at me, truly looked at me, and I saw a tiny flash of recognition cross his face, lasting for just a split second, a passing glimpse, but I knew he remembered. July 1998, Lakeshore Drive. A car smashed completely against a utility pole, the front end crushed, and smoke pouring from the engine. An 8-year-old girl trapped in the back seat, screaming. I was off duty, driving home from a long surveillance shift, and my instincts took over. I pulled over, kicked the window in, and dragged her out of that wreckage just 30 seconds before the fuel tank went up in flames. Her name was Melissa Pierce, and the man sitting up there on the bench staring down at me was her father. Judge Pierce cleared his throat, and the courtroom fell completely silent. He looked at me, not just as a judge looking at a respondent, but as one man looking at another. Mr. Sullivan, he said slowly, his voice measured and entirely controlled. Do you have anything further to present in your defense at this time? I stood up, 47 pairs of eyes tracking my every movement. I opened my mouth to speak, then stopped myself. Not yet, not here, and not like this. Your Honor, I said calmly, I respectfully request that the court grant a brief continuance to allow me additional time to properly prepare my defense. Mitchell immediately jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is an emergency petition. Mr. Sullivan has already had 5 weeks to prepare for this appearance. Judge Pierce raised a single hand, cutting him off instantly. He looked at me for a long time, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Trust, or perhaps just the enduring memory of a massive debt. Mr. Sullivan, he said carefully, how much time do you require? 1 week, Your Honor. Mitchell opened his mouth to object again, but Judge Pierce preempted him. 1 week, the judge ruled. This court will reconvene on Monday, May 9th, at 9 o'clock in the morning, Court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and a collective breath escaped the room. As I packed up my files and headed toward the door, I could feel Judge Samuel Pierce's gaze lingering squarely on my back. I knew he remembered, and that connection might be the only thing left capable of saving my life. Following the brief recess at 10:15, Judge Pierce called the court back to order. An uneasy silence settled over the room. Mitchell stood up, adjusted his tie, and looked toward the plaintiff's table. "Your Honor, I would like to call Natalie Sullivan to the stand." Natalie stood up slowly, her hands visibly shaking, and made her way over to the witness box. The bailiff swore her in, and she sat down, gripping the wooden armrests tightly, as if they were the only things keeping her grounded. Sitting up there, she looked incredibly small and fragile. Mitchell walked over to her, wearing that gentle, deeply empathetic expression that trial lawyers practice 1,000 times in front of a mirror. "Ms. Sullivan," he said softly, "I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need you to tell the court, in your own words, what exactly you've observed regarding your father's condition over these past few months." Natalie nodded, swallowed hard, and looked down at her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet it was barely audible. "He's just not himself anymore," she began. "My dad, he was always so sharp. He was always completely in control. But over these last few months, he's changed so much. He forgets things. He loses things constantly. He called me at 2 a.m. one night because he couldn't remember where he had parked his own car." Her voice caught in her throat. "He told me he saw my mother. He said she was standing right there in his office talking to him. But my mom passed away 3 years ago." She wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "I tried to help him. I brought him groceries. I cooked him dinner. I begged him to go see a doctor. And when he finally did, Dr. Prescott told me exactly what I already knew deep down. My father is sick. He desperately needs help. And if I don't step in and do something, he's going to end up getting hurt." Mitchell let her words hang in the heavy air of the courtroom for a long moment before asking, "And in your honest assessment, do you believe your father is currently capable of managing his own affairs?" Natalie looked up, her eyes red and completely swollen with tears. "No," she whispered. "I really don't." "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. I have no further questions." Mitchell returned to his table, and Judge Pierce looked across at me. "Mr. Sullivan, you may cross-examine the witness." I stood up, but I didn't walk toward the stand. I just stood there looking at Natalie. She looked back at me, her face pale, her hands still clutching those armrests tightly. I wanted so badly to tell her the absolute truth. I wanted to tell her about the risperidone, about Luca Moretti, and about the small USB drive tucked safely inside my jacket pocket, with enough hard evidence to blow this entire conspiracy wide open. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not in this room. "Ms. Sullivan?" I asked calmly. "Do you love your father?" She blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. "Of course I do." "And do you honestly believe that you're doing all this to protect him?" "Yes, even if it means stripping away his freedom, his independence, and his basic right to make decisions about his own life." Her jaw tightened visibly. "Yes, because he's simply not capable of making those decisions anymore." I nodded slowly. "Thank you. I have nothing further." I sat back down. Mitchell looked thoroughly confused. Judge Pierce looked incredibly thoughtful. And Natalie looked like she couldn't figure out whether she was supposed to be relieved or furious. And then something inside her just snapped. Natalie suddenly stood up, her chair screeching loudly against the wood floor, her voice rising sharply. "You just don't get it, do you?" she yelled, her eyes locked completely on me. "You think this is all about control? You think this is about your money? It's not. This is about keeping you alive." Her voice cracked again, much louder this time. "You are sick, Dad. You are mentally unstable. You are a danger to yourself, and I absolutely refuse to sit here and watch you fade away the exact same way Mom did." The courtroom fell dead silent. Every single pair of eyes was glued to her. Mitchell jumped to his feet. "Your Honor!" But Judge Pierce held up a hand, silencing him instantly. He looked at Natalie, then looked at me, his expression completely unreadable. Natalie was visibly shaking now, tears streaming freely down her face. "I can't lose you," she whispered through a sob. I just can't. For a split second, just one fleeting moment, I almost told her everything right then and there. But I didn't. Because if I did, Luca would know. And if Luca knew, she wouldn't just lose me. She would lose absolutely everything. Judge Pierce leaned forward, folding his hands deliberately on the bench. "Miss Sullivan," he said gently, "please take your seat." Natalie sat back down, wiping her face, trying desperately to pull herself together. The judge looked at me, then back at her, and finally down at the thick file resting in front of him. He stayed completely silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "The court fully recognizes the profound emotional weight attached to this case," he said, choosing every word carefully. "It is entirely apparent that both parties are acting out of a place of deep love and genuine concern. However, the legal threshold required to establish guardianship is exceptionally high, and the respondent has raised critical questions that absolutely warrant further examination." He shifted his gaze to Mitchell. "Mr. Mitchell, you have presented a compelling case, but I am not prepared to issue a final ruling today." Mitchell stood up immediately. "Your Honor, this is an emergency petition. I am fully aware of that, Counselor. However, Mr. Sullivan has requested additional time to prepare his defense, and I am inclined to grant it." He turned back to me. "Mr. Sullivan, you have exactly 1 week. We will reconvene in this courtroom on Monday, May 9th, at 9 o'clock in the morning. At that time, you will present your full defense, and this court will issue a final ruling. Is that completely understood?" I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a loud crack. The room instantly exhaled. People started standing up, packing their bags, and whispering quietly to one another. Natalie sat frozen in the witness box, staring right at me. I didn't look away. It was the first time in 3 months I had looked her directly in the eyes. I wanted her to see me, truly see me. Not as the broken, confused man she thought I was, but as the father who had spent 26 years hunting down criminals. The father who knew exactly what was happening. The father who was going to fix it. She was the first to break eye contact. She stood up, stepped out of the box, and followed Mitchell toward the exit. As she walked past my table, she paused for just 1 second, her eyes darting quickly toward me. And in that single second, I finally saw it. It wasn't just the profound fear of losing me. It was the absolute terror of what I might uncover. She didn't just believe I was sick. She was terrified that I wasn't, and that scared her more than anything else. She walked out of the courtroom, and I watched her go, my chest tight, my hands balled into tight fists at my sides. 1 week. That was all the time I had left. 1 week to prepare for a fight that would either save her completely or utterly destroy us both. 10 minutes after the hearing adjourned, a bailiff walked over to my table. "Mr. Sullivan," he said quietly, "Judge Pierce would like to see you in his chambers." I nodded, stood up, and followed him through a side door, down a narrow hallway lined with faded portraits of past judges, to a small wood-paneled office right at the very end. Judge Pierce was standing behind his desk. He had already taken off his black robe and rolled up his sleeves. He gestured toward the leather chair opposite him. "Please have a seat." I sat down. The bailiff closed the door behind me, leaving the two of us completely alone. Pierce didn't sit down. He stood there for a long time, studying me, his expression impossible to read. Then he finally spoke. "You're the agent who saved Melissa." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of absolute fact. I nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." He let out a slow, heavy breath, as if he had been holding it in for 24 years. "I never forgot your face. I never forgot what you did that day. But when I saw your name on the docket, I tried to convince myself it couldn't possibly be the same man. And then I saw you sitting in my courtroom, and I knew." He sat down, leaning back in his chair, and locked eyes with me. "So tell me, Agent Sullivan, what exactly is going on here?" I reached into my suit jacket, pulled out the small USB drive, and placed it firmly on his desk. "Your Honor, I don't have dementia. I am being systematically and deliberately drugged with risperidone, a powerful antipsychotic medication. Someone is actively trying to have me legally declared mentally incapacitated so they can seize control of my daughter and completely shut down my ongoing investigation. Pierce frowned deeply. Drugged with what? Risperidone. It causes acute confusion, severe memory loss, and vivid hallucinations. The exact symptoms Dr. Prescott just testified I was suffering from. I had the FBI lab run a full toxicology screen on a food sample. It came back absolutely positive. I tapped the USB drive with my finger. Every piece of evidence is right here. The lab reports, surveillance logs, bank records, all of it. Pierce picked up the drive, rolling it thoughtfully between his fingers, then looked back at me. Who is behind this? A man named Luca Moretti. His father, Tony Moretti, was a mob boss I personally put behind bars back in 1999. Luca has been waiting 23 years for revenge. He targeted my daughter, Natalie, right after her divorce when she was incredibly vulnerable, and he's been actively blackmailing her, forcing her to launder millions through her real estate company. She doesn't want any part of this. She is terrified, but she believes she has no way out. Pierce's jaw tightened visibly, and this entire conservatorship petition is a crucial part of his plan. If Natalie is granted full guardianship over me, she gains complete control of my assets, my credibility, and my total freedom. More importantly, I would never be able to testify against him in open court. I couldn't expose his massive laundering network. I would be permanently written off as a crazy old man whose words mean absolutely nothing. I leaned forward, resting my arms on his desk. Your Honor, my daughter is not a criminal mastermind. She is a hostage. If I don't stop Moretti right now, she is going to spend the rest of her life trapped under his control, or she's going to end up in a much worse situation. Pierce stayed completely silent for a long time. He set the USB drive down, steepled his fingers, and stared at it as if it were a live grenade with the pin pulled. This is an incredibly serious accusation, Agent Sullivan, he said, picking his words carefully. If what you're saying is true, this goes far beyond a simple guardianship dispute. We're talking about organized crime, severe extortion, and massive conspiracy. I know, but if you're wrong, if this is truly paranoid delusion brought on by genuine dementia, then I am knowingly enabling a man who desperately needs medical intervention. I am not wrong, I said calmly and firmly. I know exactly how insane this all sounds. I know how it looks on paper, but I spent 35 years working for the Bureau. I know the exact difference between reality and a delusion. I am telling you right now, Your Honor, this is entirely real. Pierce looked at me for a long beat, then nodded slowly. 24 years ago, you pulled my little girl out of a burning car. You didn't hesitate for a second. You didn't ask for a reward or any recognition. You just acted. Because of you, Melissa is alive today. She's a teacher now, she's happily married, and she has 2 kids of her own. His voice grew slightly rough with genuine emotion. I owe you a debt that I can never fully repay. He picked up the USB drive again. I will review this material thoroughly. If what you say is fully supported by the evidence, I will do absolutely everything within my power to assist you. But you need to understand this, Agent Sullivan. If you are wrong, I cannot protect you. The law is the law, and I absolutely will not compromise my judicial principles, not even for the man who saved my daughter's life. I understand completely, I said, and I would never ask you to. He stood up and I followed suit. He extended his hand and I shook it firmly. 1 week, he said softly. That is all the time I can give you. Make sure you use it well. The following morning, I drove directly to the FBI's Chicago Field office on West Roosevelt Road. Diane met me in the lobby, right at 8:30, personally cleared me through security, and escorted me up to a completely windowless briefing room on the 4th floor. The walls were absolutely covered with whiteboards filled with names, dates, and complex financial transactions. A projector illuminated a massive web of shell companies, all connected by thin red lines pointing directly to one single name, Luca Moretti. Diane shut the door securely behind us and gestured toward a chair. Take a seat, she said. We have a massive amount of ground to cover. I sat down, and she dropped a thick, heavy folder onto the table right between us. Judge Pierce handed the USB drive over to us on Tuesday. We've been working entirely around the clock ever since. Vernon, you handed him an absolute goldmine. 6 solid months of surveillance logs, wire transfers, and intercepted comms. We've managed to prove that over $72 million has been laundered through Morrison Development Group and 14 other shell companies over the last 3 years. I blinked, taking it in. 72 million, and that's just what we can actively trace right now. The actual number is likely much higher. She opened the file and spread out a series of documents, bank statements, wire receipts, and corporate filings. Moretti's entire network is significantly larger than we ever anticipated. Morrison is just one cog in the machine. He's operating real estate firms across 3 states, holding companies in the Caymans, and running over a dozen front businesses right here in Chicago. She tapped one specific document with her pen. Your daughter's company moves roughly $6 million a year. It's not the biggest player on the board, but it's absolutely critical to the whole operation. Without Morrison functioning, the entire structure starts to completely unravel. Diane flipped to another page. We currently have 47 active arrest warrants drafted and ready. Moretti, his top lieutenants, his key accountants, and his legal counsel. And yes, Dr. Alan Prescott. I looked up sharply. Prescott. He's been sitting on Moretti's payroll for at least 2 solid years. We tracked monthly payments of $20,000 being routed through one of the shell companies. He's not just a corrupt physician, Vernon. He is an active participant in this conspiracy. She slid another sheet of paper across the table. These are his phone records. In the single week leading up to your guardianship hearing, he made 3 direct calls to a number registered to one of Moretti's known associates. He wasn't just performing a medical evaluation, he was following strict orders. I felt an icy chill settle deep in my chest. He wanted to completely destroy my life. He certainly tried, Diane said firmly, but he failed. And when we execute these warrants, he's going down right alongside the rest of them. She closed the folder. We're launching the operation on Monday, immediately following the hearing. The second you reveal your bureau credentials and present the evidence in open court, and the judge issues a ruling in your favor, we'll have everything we need to move in. Moretti won't even see it coming. I leaned back in the chair, staring up at the massive web of names on the whiteboard. What about Natalie? Diane's expression shifted, looking visibly uncomfortable. That is the hardest part of this entire case. Just tell me. She sighed heavily. Natalie is a critical piece of this laundering operation. She personally signed off on every single transaction. Her name is on the bank accounts, the corporate charters, and the wire transfers. Even if she was heavily coerced, even if she was actively blackmailed, the legal system doesn't automatically erase that. She committed serious federal crimes. How much time is she facing? I asked quietly. If she refuses to cooperate, 5 to 10 years, maybe even more, depending entirely on the prosecutor. 5 to 10 years, my daughter locked away in a federal prison. Diane leaned closer across the table. But if she fully cooperates, if she takes the stand against Moretti, and if she actively helps us build the case against the rest of the network, we can offer her a solid deal. Probation, supervised release, and maybe some mandatory community service. Absolutely no jail time, but she has to flip on them, Vernon, and she has to make that decision fast. I closed my eyes. She doesn't even know I'm still with the Bureau. I know. She truly believes I've lost my mind. She honestly thinks taking away my freedom is the only way to protect me. I know. And when she finally learns the absolute truth, when she realizes I've been lying to her this entire time, actively investigating her, and working directly with the FBI, she is going to completely hate me. Diane remained silent for a long moment. Then she said softly, Maybe she will. Or maybe she'll realize you were doing everything in your power to save her life. I looked right at her. And what if she doesn't want to be saved? Then you'll know you did absolutely everything you possibly could, Diane replied, and that's truly all any parent can ever do. Over the next 3 days, I ran through the plan in my head 100 times. Diane walked me through every piece of evidence, the exact timeline, and the precise logistics. I rehearsed exactly what I would say in court, how I would formally present my credentials, how I would hand over the USB drive, and how I would explain it all in a way that Judge Pierce could accept and Natalie could somehow understand. On Friday afternoon, we held one final briefing. Diane, two other special agents, and an assistant U.S. attorney named Christine Barnes. Barnes was sharp, strictly all business, with short gray hair and an incredibly intense stare. "Mr. Sullivan," she said firmly, shaking my hand, "I've reviewed the entire evidence file. It is incredibly solid. The second you take the stand on Monday, we are fully prepared to move, but I need you to understand one vital thing. This is going to get incredibly ugly. Moretti has exceptional lawyers, and your daughter is going to be caught right in the crossfire." "I understand completely." "Do you really?" Barnes leaned in closer. "Because once this operation goes live, there is absolutely no turning back. You cannot shield her from the fallout. The best thing you can possibly do is show her the way out, and that absolutely means she has to make the choice to take it herself." I nodded. "I know." Barnes studied my face for a moment, then sat back. "All right, then. We are a go." That Sunday night, the eve of the final hearing, I sat alone in my apartment, staring up at the ceiling, completely unable to sleep. I had tried. I laid down at 11, closed my eyes, and forced myself to try and rest. But every single time I shut my eyes, I saw that courtroom. I saw Natalie's face the exact moment I laid out the truth. I saw the absolute realization that her father wasn't sick at all, that he was a federal agent who had been investigating her the whole time. I finally got out of bed at 2 in the morning, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. The USB drive sat right in front of me. 6 months of hard evidence packed into a tiny piece of plastic, no bigger than my thumb. 26 years. 26 years of hunting down criminals, locking them away and trying to make the world just a little bit safer. And now, the very criminal I was hunting had total control over my own daughter, and I was about to set her free, whether she wanted it or not. I picked up the USB drive, slipped it safely into my jacket pocket, and looked out at the dark Chicago skyline. Tomorrow, absolutely everything was going to change. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom and burn this entire conspiracy to the ground. I just prayed to God that when the smoke finally cleared, my daughter would still be standing, and that she would somehow understand why I had to do it. Before I tell you what happens inside the courtroom, I really want to hear from you. Do you think I made the right call? Will Natalie ever forgive me? Drop a comment below and let me know you're still with me. Also, just a quick reminder, the rest of this story includes some fictional elements added for dramatic effect. If that's not your thing, feel free to stop here. But if you're ready, let's bring this story home. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, courtroom 506. The room was absolutely packed, even more so than the previous week. Every single seat in the gallery was taken. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder along the back wall, cameras completely ready. Word had clearly gotten out. This was no longer just a simple guardianship dispute. This was something much, much bigger. I sat alone at the defense table, my hands folded neatly in front of me, my heart hammering so hard I could actually feel it pulsing in my throat. Natalie and Charles Mitchell sat across the aisle, both looking pale, their hands visibly shaking in their laps. She hadn't looked my way once since I walked in, sitting exactly in the third row of the gallery, wearing an incredibly expensive charcoal suit, and looking entirely too confident for a man who should have been sweating, was Luca Moretti. He caught my eye and smirked, a smug, arrogant smile from a man who was absolutely certain he had already won. The bailiff stood up. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Samuel Pierce presiding." We all stood. Judge Pierce entered the courtroom, took his seat at the bench, and opened the thick file in front of him. He looked directly at me, then at Natalie, and finally at Mitchell. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "before this court issues a final ruling, does the petitioner wish to present any additional evidence?" Mitchell quickly stood up. "No, Your Honor. We firmly believe the evidence already on record speaks for itself." "Very well, Mr. Sullivan. You requested an additional week to prepare your defense. You may proceed." I stood up. This was it. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out my FBI badge. Worn, slightly faded, but undeniably real. I held it up high so every single person in that courtroom could see it clearly. Your Honor, I said, my voice completely steady and unwavering, my name is Vernon Sullivan, and I am a retired special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The entire courtroom erupted instantly. Loud gasps, frantic murmurs, and someone in the back row actually yelled out a question. Judge Pierce slammed his gavel down hard. Order! I will have absolute order in this court. The room fell quiet, but the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Natalie was staring right at me, her jaw completely dropped, pure shock radiating from her eyes. Mitchell looked as if the floor had just vanished out from under his feet. And Luca Moretti, Luca's arrogant smirk completely disappeared. Your Honor, I continued, I'm not suffering from dementia. I have been deliberately and systematically drugged with risperidone, a powerful antipsychotic medication, in a calculated effort to entirely destroy my credibility and permanently shut down my ongoing investigation into a massive money laundering operation orchestrated by Luca Moretti. I pointed directly at the gallery. Every head in the room instantly turned. Luca sat completely frozen, his jaw tight, glaring fiercely right back at me. Mr. Moretti has been actively blackmailing my daughter, Natalie Sullivan, completely forcing her to launder millions of dollars through her real estate firm, Morrison Development Group. Over $72 million has been moved through Morrison and 14 other shell companies over the last 3 years. My daughter is not a criminal. She is a hostage. I turned my focus back to Judge Pierce. Your Honor, I have absolute proof. 6 months of FBI surveillance logs, detailed bank records, intercepted communications, and the certified lab results proving the risperidone in my system. I pulled the small USB drive from my pocket and held it up. Every piece of evidence is right here. Judge Pierce leaned forward intensely. Mr. Sullivan, are you telling this court that you have been operating undercover during these legal proceedings? Not officially undercover, Your Honor. I formally retired from the Bureau back in 2020. But when I discovered my daughter's direct connection to Moretti, I immediately contacted my former handler, Special Agent in Charge Diane Foster. We have been actively building this case for the past 6 months, and Dr. Alan Prescott, the physician who diagnosed me with dementia, is currently on Moretti's payroll to the tune of $20,000 a month. He entirely fabricated my medical diagnosis, specifically to support this guardianship petition. I looked squarely at Prescott, who was sitting in the second row looking absolutely terrified. He is an active co-conspirator in this entire operation. Mitchell practically leaped to his feet. Your Honor, this is entirely absurd. Mr. Sullivan is clearly... Sit down, Mr. Mitchell, Judge Pierce ordered coldly. Mitchell slowly sank back into his chair. The judge locked eyes with me. Mr. Sullivan, you are making incredibly serious allegations. Do you have hard evidence to back this up? Yes, Your Honor, I said, pointing straight toward the back of the room. And so does the FBI. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open forcefully. Diane Foster marched in, flanked entirely by 6 heavily armed FBI agents wearing tactical vests, their badges shining brightly on chains around their necks. The courtroom went completely dead silent. Diane walked purposefully down the center aisle, her eyes locked completely on Luca Moretti. She stopped right at his row and held up a neatly folded document. Luca Moretti, she said, her voice echoing clearly, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, severe extortion, and witness intimidation. 2 agents immediately flanked him on both sides. Luca stood up, his face twisted in pure rage. You absolutely cannot do this. I know my rights. You have the right to remain completely silent, Diane said calmly, watching as the agents pulled his arms securely behind his back and snapped the heavy cuffs into place. And anything you do say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The entire courtroom exploded into total chaos. Reporters were shouting questions over each other. Camera flashes went off in rapid succession. People were standing up, craning their necks to get a better look. Judge Pierce slammed his gavel down repeatedly. Order! Order in this court! Diane turned her attention to the second row. Dr. Alan Prescott, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit severe fraud an active obstruction of justice. Prescott tried to stand, perhaps to run, but two agents were already physically holding him down. They cuffed him securely, hauled him to his feet, and began marching him toward the heavy doors. Luca was dragged right past my table, still fighting, still screaming. As he passed me, he turned his head and spat viciously. "You think you actually won? You think this is really over? She is going down right alongside me, old man. Your daughter is going to prison." I didn't even flinch. I just looked him dead in the eye and said entirely calmly, "No, she won't." The agents completely removed him from the room. The heavy doors shut firmly behind them. The courtroom was still buzzing with intense noise and pure chaos. But slowly, very slowly, it began to settle down. Judge Pierce struck his gavel one final authoritative time. "I will have absolute order in this courtroom." The noise finally died down. Everyone took their seats. In the sudden, heavy silence that followed, I looked completely across the aisle at Natalie. She was sitting absolutely still, tears silently streaming down her face, her hands gripping the edge of her table so hard her knuckles were completely white. She was staring at me like she didn't know me at all, like I was a total stranger. Judge Pierce cleared his throat. "Ms. Sullivan," he said gently, "do you have absolutely anything to say in response to these profound allegations?" Natalie couldn't speak, not at first. She just sat there, looking down at her hands, her shoulders visibly shaking as the tears continued to fall. The courtroom waited in complete silence. Judge Pierce didn't push her. He just sat there patiently, his expression entirely compassionate, letting the heavy silence stretch out. Finally, Natalie looked up at him, her voice barely more than a terrified whisper. "I honestly don't know what to say, Your Honor." "Take your time," Pierce said softly. She wiped her eyes, took a deep, shaky breath, and looked completely across the aisle at me. "Is it really true?" she asked, her voice cracking heavily. "Are you really with the FBI?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." "And you were actually investigating me this entire time?" "I was never investigating you," I said, choosing my words with extreme care. "I was investigating the man who was completely exploiting you." She shook her head, fresh tears falling down her cheeks. "I don't understand any of this. I truly thought you were sick. I thought I was losing you forever. You never lost me, Nat. I was doing absolutely everything in my power to save you." She stared at me for a long, quiet moment before turning back to Judge Pierce. "Your Honor, I need to tell you everything." Judge Pierce leaned forward closely. "Go ahead, Miss Sullivan." Natalie's hands were visibly shaking. She folded them in her lap, took another incredibly deep breath, and finally began. "My father is telling the absolute truth. Luca Moretti has been actively blackmailing me for the last 2 years. After my divorce, I was in a completely terrible place, both financially and emotionally. I made some massive mistakes. I signed contracts I never should have signed. I honestly didn't realize it was entirely illegal at the time. I was completely desperate. And Luca, he made it seem like he was genuinely helping me. But then he showed me a video of me physically signing those exact documents. He told me that if I didn't do exactly what he demanded, he would send the footage straight to the FBI. He promised he would ruin my entire life." Her voice cracked heavily. "So I did exactly what he told me to do. I moved the money through my company. I never asked any questions. I just did it because I was completely terrified." She looked back at me, her eyes red and completely swollen. "And then Dad started acting so strange, forgetting things constantly, seeing intense hallucinations. I truly believed he was getting sick. I had absolutely no idea he was being drugged. I had no idea Luca was behind any of it. I just thought my father was actively dying, and I had to do whatever it took to protect him." She completely broke down, burying her face in her hands and sobbing intensely. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry, Dad." Judge Pierce gave her a moment to collect herself before finally speaking. "Miss Sullivan, there is something I want you to completely understand." He looked at me, then right back at her. 24 years ago, your father actively saved my daughter's life. Her name is Melissa, and she was only 8 years old at the time. There was a terrible accident on Lake Shore Drive. The car caught fire and Melissa was trapped in the back seat. Your father was completely off duty. He absolutely didn't have to stop, but he did. He kicked the window in, pulled her out, and got her to absolute safety, just 30 seconds before the entire gas tank exploded. The courtroom was dead silent. Every single person in the gallery was hanging on his every word. If Vernon Sullivan hadn't been there that day, Judge Pierce continued, his voice thick with emotion, my daughter would have died. Because of him, she lived. She's a teacher now, happily married with 2 beautiful children. He looked over at me, and I saw a deep gratitude in his eyes, a thankfulness that had been carried silently for 24 years. So when this case crossed my desk and I saw his name, I didn't recognize it at first, but the moment I saw him in this courtroom, I knew exactly who he was. And when he came to my chambers and showed me the evidence, I believed him. He cleared his throat, because Vernon Sullivan is not a man who lies. He is not a man who breaks, and he is absolutely not a man suffering from dementia. Judge Pierce turned his focus back to Natalie. Your father has been fighting for you this entire time, Ms. Sullivan. I am officially dismissing this petition for guardianship. Vernon Sullivan is of sound mind, in perfect health, and he does not require a conservator. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Case closed. A collective sigh of pure relief rippled through the courtroom. Reporters were scribbling furiously, and camera flashes blinks in rapid succession. But I didn't care about any of that. I was looking at Natalie, and she was looking right back at me. For the first time in months, I saw something other than terror in her eyes. I saw relief. Judge Pierce cleared his throat again. However, Ms. Sullivan, the matter of your involvement in Mr. Moretti's money laundering operation still needs to be addressed. Assistant U.S. Attorney Barnes, what does the government wish to present to the court? Christine Barnes stood up from the gallery and stepped forward. She was calm, professional, and her voice carried easily. Your Honor, the government fully recognizes that Ms. Sullivan was coerced into participating in this criminal enterprise. We do not believe she was a mastermind or a willing participant. However, federal crimes were committed, and there must be accountability. She turned to face Natalie. Ms. Sullivan, the government is prepared to offer you a formal agreement, provided you offer your full cooperation. If you testify against Luca Moretti and provide substantial evidence regarding his illicit operations, we will recommend a sentence of probation, supervised release, and mandatory community service. Absolutely no jail time. But you must agree to cooperate, and you have to make that decision right now. Natalie looked over at me. I gave her a firm, reassuring nod. She turned back to Barnes. I will, she whispered. I'll cooperate. Barnes nodded. Then we have an agreement. Judge Pierce spoke to Natalie one final time. Ms. Sullivan, a court officer, will escort you to meet with the federal prosecutors. You will provide a full statement, and legal counsel will be assigned to assist you through the process. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Then this court is adjourned. The gavel came down for the last time, and the room began to clear out. Reporters rushed out the doors to file their stories. Mitchell packed up his legal documents and left without saying a single word. Natalie stood up slowly, looking a bit unsteady on her feet, and walked toward the side exit where a court officer was waiting. But just before reaching the door, she stopped. She turned around and took one last look at me. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something else in them now, a tiny spark of hope. Dad, she said softly, her voice cracking, thank you. I didn't know what to say. Thank me for what? For dismantling the life she had tried so hard to build? For handing her over to federal prosecutors? For forcing her into a corner where she had no choice but to turn on the man who had total control over her? Or for finally saving her from his grip? I just gave her a quiet nod. She looked at me for one more second, then turned and walked out the door. It clicked shut gently behind her, and just like that, my daughter was gone again. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the dust had completely settled. I was sitting in a small, windowless interrogation room at the FBI's Chicago field office, right across from Diane Foster, the exact same room where we had mapped out this entire operation weeks ago. She set a heavy folder on the table between us and slid it open. 47 arrests, she said, her voice calm but filled with a deep sense of accomplishment. We executed the warrants simultaneously at 2 o'clock across Chicago, the suburbs, and 3 other states. Luca Moretti, Dr. Alan Prescott, Moretti's top lieutenants, accountants, lawyers, and shell company executives. We got every single one of them. She slid a document across the table. We've already frozen $72 million in assets, bank accounts, real estate holdings, luxury vehicles, and offshore funds. The U.S. Attorney's Office is working directly with the IRS to trace the rest, but this is a devastating blow to Moretti's network. I looked down at the list of names. A few were familiar, but most were strangers, all of them cogs in the massive machine that had tried to destroy me and take my daughter hostage. "What kind of time is Moretti looking at?" I asked. Diane didn't hesitate. "Life. The charges include money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and attempted fraud. Given his prior record and the sheer scale of the operation, the sentencing guidelines point directly to life without the possibility of parole. He's finished, Vernon. He will never see the light of day again." I gave a slow nod. Good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt entirely empty. Diane closed the folder and looked at me intently. Natalie is cooperating fully. She spent the entire afternoon with Assistant U.S. Attorney Barnes giving her statement. She's providing names, dates, transactions, everything we need to build an absolutely airtight case against Moretti. "And her sentence?" I asked quietly. 3 years of supervised probation and 1,000 hours of community service. Absolutely no jail time. As long as she abides by the terms of the agreement and testifies at trial, she walks away clean. Well, as clean as possible. Diane leaned forward. "Vernon, she is incredibly lucky. Without your intervention and the evidence you personally gathered, she would be facing 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. You saved her." I looked down at my hands. "Then why does it feel like this?" Diane was quiet for a moment. "Because you're her father," she said gently. "You had to hurt her to save her. It's never going to feel good, Vernon. It was just something that had to be done." I nodded. She was right. But knowing that didn't make the ache in my chest go away. "What happens now?" I asked. "Moretti's arraignment is set for Friday. The trial will likely start in 6 to 8 months. Natalie will be called to testify, and you'll likely take the stand as well to walk through the investigation, the drugging, and the guardianship plot. This isn't completely over, Vernon, but the hardest part is behind you." She stood up and extended her hand. "You did an incredible job. Elizabeth would be proud of you." I shook her hand, forcing a small smile. "Thanks, Diane." "Go home," she said. "Get some rest. You've earned it." But I didn't go home. Not right away. I spent hours driving aimlessly through the city, watching Chicago blur past my windows with its signature cold, unapologetic beauty. I thought about calling Natalie, but I had no idea what to say. "I'm sorry." "I love you." "Please don't hate me." None of it felt right, so I just kept driving. Eventually, I found myself back at my apartment in Lincoln Park. I parked by the curb, climbed the stairs, unlocked the door, and walked inside. The apartment was exactly how I had left it that morning. Quiet, still, and completely empty. I flicked on the lights. The walls were lined with the pieces of a life I had built over 64 years. Photos of Elizabeth, framed drawings Natalie had made when she was a little girl, and a bookshelf packed with old case files and true crime novels I never got around to finishing. Everything looked exactly the same, yet everything had completely changed. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, but I didn't drink it. I just stood there, staring at the refrigerator. Taped to the door was a drawing Natalie had done when she was 7 years old. A crayon picture of the 3 of us standing in front of a house under a crooked yellow sun. At the bottom she had written in big, uneven letters, "My family." I stared at it for a long, quiet moment. Then I walked into the living room, sat down on the sofa, and just let myself feel it. All of it. The exhaustion, the relief, the grief, and the profound loneliness. I had won the case. I had saved my daughter. I had taken down a criminal empire. So why did it feel like I had just lost absolutely everything? I sat there as the darkness deepened around me, still wearing that navy suit, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched, staring blankly into space. Tomorrow, I would figure out what came next. Tomorrow, I would start the slow process of rebuilding whatever relationship was left between Natalie and me. Tomorrow, I would try to make sense of it all. But tonight, I just needed to sit in the quiet and hold the weight of what I had done. Because I saved her life. But I had no idea if she would ever forgive me. And I wasn't entirely sure if I would ever forgive myself for what it took to get her back. Outside, the hum of the city went on. Inside, I sat alone in the dark. For the first time in 26 years, I had absolutely no idea what my next step was supposed to be. 3 years later, it was a beautiful Monday morning in May, and I was standing just outside the Cook County probation office, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, keeping my eyes fixed on the front doors. It was exactly 10 o'clock. The sun was bright, and the air smelled like spring, fresh and clean, the kind of weather Chicago only gets for a few precious weeks out of the year. I had been waiting out there for 20 minutes. I wasn't nervous, not entirely, but I wasn't completely at ease either. The heavy doors swung open and Natalie walked out. She was 39 now, her hair cut a bit shorter, her face carrying a quiet maturity. She was wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She stopped dead in her tracks when she spotted me, looking genuinely surprised. "Dad?" "Hey, kiddo," I said. 他还蛮谨慎地走过来，仿佛在确认我是真实的，还是某种梦境。你在这里做什么？ "Thought you might want a ride," I replied. She studied my face for a long moment, and then a tiny tentative smile appeared, the first genuine smile I had seen from her in 3 long years. "I'd really like that," she said softly. We walked over to my car in comfortable silence. I opened the passenger door for her, and she slid inside. I got behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out into traffic. For a while, neither of us said a word. Then Natalie broke the silence. "I'm officially done," she said. 3 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service. It's all fully completed. "I know," I said. "How does it feel?" She thought about it for a beat. "Strange. It's like I'm constantly waiting for someone to tell me I messed up and have to start all over again. But no one is coming. I'm completely free." "You really are." She looked over at me. "I'm working now. Did you know that?" I nodded. Diane filled me in. Director of Housing Services at a shelter in Uptown. I help people secure permanent housing, connect them with local resources, and help them get back on their feet. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a steady strength. It's not glamorous work, but it's real, and it's truly meaningful. "It absolutely is," I said. "I'm incredibly proud of you." She turned her gaze back toward the window, watching the city pass by. "I took the stand, Dad. 2 years ago at Luca's trial. I told them absolutely everything. Every single transaction, every meeting, every lie. I know you did. They gave him 30 years. He'll be 75 when he gets out, if he even makes it that long." "Good," she said. We drove in silence for a few more blocks. Then Natalie spoke again, her voice dropping even lower. "I'm so sorry." I glanced over at her. "For what?" "For not believing you. For thinking you were losing your mind. For trying to strip away your freedom." Her voice cracked slightly. "For all of it." I pulled the car over to the curb, shifted into park, and turned around to look at her directly. "Natalie," I said gently, "I forgave you a long time ago." She shook her head, tears starting to slip down her cheeks. "But I hurt you, Dad. I tried to have you legally declared mentally incompetent. I came so close to ruining your entire life." "You were terrified," I told her. "You were being actively manipulated by a man who spent 2 solid years convincing you that you had absolutely no way out. You did what you thought you had to do to survive, and you were genuinely trying to protect me. Even if your method was wrong, your reason for doing it never was." I reached out and placed my hand over hers. "You are my daughter. There is absolutely nothing I wouldn't do to save you. And I did it. If I had to go through it all over again, I wouldn't hesitate for a second." She broke down entirely, covering her face as she sobbed. I just sat there, holding her hand, letting her let it all out. After a few minutes, she wiped away her tears, took a deep breath, and looked back at me. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for never giving up on me." I squeezed her hand tightly. "Never. We sat there for a little while longer before I shifted back into drive and pulled onto the road. We drove through the city, passing through the Loop, Lincoln Park, and the exact neighborhoods I had patrolled for 26 years. Chicago stretched out before us, loud, chaotic, and completely full of second chances. Natalie sat right beside me, looking out the window. She was different now, quieter, stronger, carrying scars but visibly healing, and so was I. I thought about Elizabeth, thinking about how incredibly happy she would be if she could see this moment, seeing her daughter free and starting fresh. I thought about Judge Pierce, who gave me the opportunity to save Natalie, when he could have easily written me off as a paranoid old man. I thought about Diane, who believed in me when everyone else had structural doubts. And I thought about the last 3 years, the phone calls, the visits, and the slow, deliberate process of rebuilding trust. It hadn't been easy, and it still wasn't, but we were here, and we were putting in the work. "Dad," Natalie said softly. "Yeah? Thanks for staying sharp." I looked over at her, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt something other than grief, anger, or exhaustion. I felt genuine hope. "Always," I said. We drove onward toward the horizon, a father and a daughter, completely imperfect, with wounds that weren't fully healed. But we were together, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. And for those of you listening to this story, remember this. Just when I thought I had lost absolutely everything, I was given a second chance. When I sat alone in my dark apartment after that first hearing, heartbroken and completely isolated, I prayed for the first time in years. I didn't pray for a legal victory, because I had already secured the evidence. I prayed to win back the heart of my daughter. 3 years later, that prayer was answered, not in the way I expected, but in the exact way we both needed. Looking back at the past, I see exactly where I went wrong. I spent 26 years chasing down criminals, fully convinced that by making the world safer, I was protecting my family. But I forgot the most important truth of all. The people you love need your presence, not just your protection. I miss the choir concerts. I miss the college visits. I miss those quiet, ordinary moments where trust is built. And when my daughter needed me most, when Luca Moretti found her vulnerable and terrified, she didn't come to me. Because I had spent her entire life teaching her that the job always came first. Don't make the same mistake I did. Do not let your career, your mission, or your pride steal away your precious time with the people who matter most. Because one day you will look up and realize they are gone, and no amount of justice, no courtroom victory, and no criminal behind bars will ever fill that void. I learned the hard way that betrayal from family cuts far deeper than any blade. When Natalie stood in that courtroom and called me mentally unstable, it wasn't just a legal strategy. It was the harvest of the distance I had created over the years. Family rift doesn't happen overnight. It's built slowly through countless missed calls, broken promises, and the unspoken implication that everything else is more important than them. And when that fallout finally lands, it is absolutely devastating. But here's the other thing I learned along the way. Rifts can be healed. It's not easy, and it definitely doesn't happen overnight. But as long as both sides are truly willing to put in the effort, trust can absolutely be rebuilt. These stories are about choices, the decisions we make when we're young, and the consequences we must hold when we grow old. They are warnings, blessings, and second chances wrapped in worn skin and tired voices. So please, listen carefully. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below and let me know. Have you ever had to choose between your calling and your family? How did you handle it? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more real-life lessons like this one. Your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I know it was a long journey and it wasn't an easy listen, but some truths are absolutely worth waiting for. Before we sign off, just a quick reminder. The stories you hear on this channel include fictional elements designed for educational and illustrative purposes. If this type of content isn't right for you, feel free to explore other videos that better match your preferences. But if you're ready for the next chapter, I'll be right here waiting to share another lesson, Life taught me the hard way. Stay safe, and remember, it is absolutely never too late to find your way back home.